aye. Against, carried. Move now to the real first order of business, so we'll catch up. We're on page 45, and that's letter of expectations for TDHL, and I think Chief Executive. Thank you, Bede.
With your permission, Your Worship, I might just ask the General Manager of TDHL to come forward.
Yes, certainly. Welcome, Fraser.
So, look, this is in aligned, Your Worship, is in alignment with the Statement of Intent, and the idea being that it specifies a handful of expectations that you sign on behalf of Council and send to the Board of TDHL. The real purpose, really, we see with this one is for TDHL to look carefully at where Council is going with its long-term plan, because out over the next 12 months, Council will develop its long-term plan, which sets the direction for the following 10 years, but in particular with an emphasis on the next 3 years, starting from 1 July 2024, and we think it would be helpful if TDHL, in preparing and organising and deciding on their own strategic priorities, were to be mindful of that, and that's a large part of it. So we set that expectation. We think also that it would be helpful if there was clear direction back to Council on the investment priorities and objectives of TDHL, so that there's a clear understanding of where they are going to go. And finally, the preparation of a dividend policy, so that there's certainty for Council as to what revenue it may expect from TDHL. We'll take questions on that, Your Worship.
Thank you. And look, just one thing that I think might be worth putting in, and I'm conscious of, I think the strategic alignment makes really good sense. We need to get the alignment with our other CCO as well. Conscious that the strategic direction takes us into specific, property type development, and my question is the current skills matrix around the board table fit for purpose, and can we look to renew that? So does that sit with, it would internally sit with the board to redo, or the chair to lead their skills matrix, would that be correct? And then I'm just conscious that it needs to be up to date for the current business that they're in.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if we were to ask the board to assess and review its skills matrix, particularly if it's looking at its strategic priorities and its investment objectives. That I think would be useful, and we would go back and ask them to assess what their current skills are and what they believe they should be, so that the gap analysis is formulated.
Okay, cool.
And then they can look to shape what they require in terms of governance.
Yep, we can tidy that up if everyone's comfortable with it in the recommendation. Any other further questions from the floor in regard to letter of expectations? Councillor Booth, thank you.
We had a report done for us back in 2019 by Martin Jenkins around specifically on the holdings company, and also they sort of indicated that we had been doing a letter of expectation, which is actually, if you've done the IOD course, you actually realise that it's actually a key part of governance. And for us as a shareholder not to be giving a reasonably, not a specific but a generic, but some specific stuff in there in regards to where our expectations are of our investment company, we're probably really not doing our job right, because the company actually does need to know what the shareholder expectations are. And as a group of councillors, we're responsible for the governance of that. So therefore, I think we should have probably had a meeting about that and discussed what, other than the generic stuff that should be going in there, about some of the stuff that we'd like to achieve in the time and the strategy going forward. As an example, some of the stuff that we're working on. And if you've actually had a look at some of the other the letter of expectations, such as the Auckland City Council and Tasman, while they have some generic stuff, there is some specific stuff around some of the stuff that they're trying to do. And so I would expect, and I'd like to see us to actually have a discussion about this prior to, actually, it's not up to the holdings company to tell us what, we are the shareholders and we represent the ratepayers who own the company. So we actually need to be giving them clear expectations of what we would like them to be trying to achieve. And so it's not onerous, but it's simply, you need to know. And it's clear in the report by Martin Jenkins that there was no direction prior, and there was it just kept getting rolled over with no specific information. So I don't think that this is good enough, and that I think we need to go back and actually have a proper workshop. And while there is some specific generic stuff, but there needs to be some specific stuff that we'd actually like to see in there.
Look, I guess on your comments, I'm comfortable for us to have that. I mean, you've obviously done some thinking on this. I'm comfortable that we have the discussion now. It's, I think as far as the timing wise, we could do a workshop, and I take your point, and this is probably something that's going to build over time, but it is in front of us. To the point I made, I think it's missing review of skills matrix. What are some of the, my question to you is, what are some of the things that you think are missing, and we can consider them right now. If people are comfortable with that, I think it's a nice, transparent way to approach it. Councillor Pye.
I had a bit of a list of things that I thought it was missing under headings. Culture is one of them, around being a good landlord, responsible investments, not bringing our name into disrepute, not those specific words, but those kind of things, being a good shareholder. Thought communication was another heading, so no surprises communication, which I know it happens and it's alluded to elsewhere in our documents, but that's, if that's what we expect, that's what we should say. And proactive communication with stakeholders, including the media. Strategy, I 100% agree it needs to align with our long-term strategic alignment. We talk about economic development a lot, but it's not in here. Investment, about diverse and spreading risks and how they're monitored and reviewed. About the dividend policy and performance together. And it's not just about paying a dividend, it's about performance and performance at the highest level with continual improvement and having financial stability. And then I had a whole section on governance, which you alluded to before, but practicing and promoting good governance both with the holdings company but also with the shareholders that they're shareholders in, which includes, like you talked about, the skills matrix, board charters, and making sure they all align with the strategy. And then my kind of last thing is, how do we then hold account to this letter of expectations? Do we expect a report back from the holdings company each year saying this is how we met your expectations, or this is where we failed to meet your expectations and this is why? Sorry, that was my quick wrap of what I had.
That's great, fantastic. Thank you. And Fraser, would you like to maybe comment on the piece around accountability?
Thank you, Your Worship. Mayor, councillors, thanks for having me today. It's really good to be able to hear your feedback directly. I think overall, the letter of expectations is sort of like an icing on the cake sometimes, and the SOI is the icing on the cake of the relationship between the organisations. We need to have an ongoing and open conversation about each other's expectations and what's going on and what is being delivered. That's where that alignment with the LTP becomes really, really important, which we need to work towards. And when you go through your next LTP cycle, we can align closer to you on that. But a lot of those things, Councillor Booth and Pye, we can, are definitely accommodatable and are within the existing statement of intent and can be highlighted and given more prominence. And I suppose that's definitely one of the key, holding to account. At the end of the day, there's got to be that bottom line. We've said all these things. How are you as a shareholder going to be able to simply and easily go, yep, you've done what we've wanted to do? And that's why we highlighted those really simple KPIs, and they're the activity KPIs, turning up and managing associates and generating return. We've tried to make those really simple. But I think we can probably do some more work around those to ensure we're meeting those as governance, investments, communications, and relationship pieces. So
go Councillor Scott and then Councillor Booth.
I was a little bit like Michelle, I had a bit of a list too, but being mindful not to replicate the statement of intent. I think our job here is to have clear guidance around the expectations of TDHL. And I was actually quite surprised that you didn't have a SIPO. I thought that would have been something that was well and truly ingrained in TDHL, so that actually was a bit of a red flag for me. Some of the smaller organisations I'm involved in have SIPOs, so yeah, definitely keen to make sure that that is definitely on your annual priority list. I think for me too is actually our role was the strategic direction for TDHL and setting some annual priorities and being able to measure those, and I think that's what Michelle's saying. Some of the areas I thought too that was missing in here is around our expectations around community engagement, our expectations around, you know, specific performance measures, and I just think, yeah, and our relationship between TDC and TDHL. So what are our communication channels, our expectations and our collaboration? So I think that it needs a little bit more work, and I think, and that's only to support TDHL, so that they have really good clear guidance on our aspirations.
Fantastic, thank you. Councillor Booth.
Yeah, look, the example that I was looking at with the with Auckland was it's basically for it includes the triennial, so it's like a clear direction for 3 years basically, and with perhaps some minor tweaks, but certainly we should you know, you need to know what our expectations are as a group, a governance group, and so it starts from that. Thank you.
And are you comfortable that that's picked up well enough within point 1 of the letter, that long-term strategic alignment with LTP, or do you need that to be threshed out?
Not really, no. I'd like to see a lot more in it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Anyone else like to make a question or comment? You have to take either, and then I'll sort of got a pathway forward. No, that's cool. So, look, I think we've recorded the balance of what's been said today, and I think probably just as far as moving this forward, what we might do, if everyone's comfortable, because we do need to hit timelines on this, is that we might look to delegate just some authority for final sign-off. So what we'll do is encapsulate, you know, some of the things that have been discussed: culture, skills matrix, sitting under government, take your point, comms, no surprises, proactive, dividend policy together with performance, that's correct, yeah. And then that, what does accountability look like? District, and so what's the alignment there? But I'll go to Councillor Piddington.
Yeah, my one was going to be around that economic development and some sort of relationship with Venture Timaru, so we're on the same rocker. But what I'd like to suggest, Nigel, is perhaps yourself, Alan, Stacey and Councillor Pye get together and just tweak it, and then you sign it off, because you're the three that are driving it on this occasion, if they're comfortable with that, because I think it is a bit light the way it sits, and that's no disrespect to TDHL, but we can't hold them to account unless we've given them what we need. That's unfair.
Yeah, I totally support that. So is everyone comfortable with that direction? Councillor Booth, you're good with that? So go back to the recommendations, which are on page 45. Receives the report and draft letter expectations with amends the letter, number 2, amends the letter of expectations as required as per the discussion today, and approves delegated authority to Councillor Pye, Councillor Booth and myself. Is that correct, Councillor Piddington? Yep. And then final...
Councillor Scott.
And Councillor Scott, did you want to...
Yeah. Oh,
Sorry, yeah, no, make sure that's clear. So for and Councillor Scott, pick that up, perfect. Yeah, for delegated authority to sign the letter off before I sign it. So everyone comfortable with that as a recommendation? I'm happy to move that. Councillor Booth, you happy to second that? Any further discussion? No, we'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Hence carried. Brilliant. Thanks, Mr Munro. And sorry, just for the record, I did have an apology from the chair, Mark Rogers, which I'll just, if you could please note. Thank you. So move now to 9.3, which is financial report for the year. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, and just taking from our learnings this morning to both focus on the positive and also the opportunity to improve. So we'll pass over to the team to present. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, your worship, councillors. While three of us sit here at the table today, the report in front of you is the work of across our organisation and does not reflect the amount of mahi that goes into delivering this to you today. You will notice this is the 9-month report, which includes reporting on our non-financial KPIs as well as our financial KPIs. You'll notice there's some highlights and some issues raised. We will take the report as read and open the floor to questions, and either we or our colleagues may be able to assist, or we may need to seek further guidance. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Trudy. Who wants to go first? Councillor Piddington.
Well, as usual, I've got a few questions, so I'll try and only hit the highlights. Page 50, Land Transport Unit were successful in $6.4 million of funding, which was rather confusing, from the Transport Choices Program administered by Waka Kotahi for the Climate Emergency Release Fund. And we're going to improve, after all that, walking and cycling. Is that down rivers and along coasts? What exactly are we getting for our 6.4 million? Well, what are we spending it on?
This is a great example of central government policy collecting funding and saying it's going to climate change, but actually having no real effect. And although we welcome the funding, and the team have done a great job, it's a great example of what's wrong with our system. But I'll let Andrew speak to the details.
Yeah, thank you. So this funding is for walkways and cycleways. The purpose of the funding is to try and get people out of their private cars and using active transport. So it is basically on-road works, effectively, transport corridors. This is not for your recreational off-road cycleways or walkways there. So we have a number of projects we are working through. We're working through. This funding is over the next 2 years. And we are in discussions with Waka Kotahi on the actual each individual projects. But an example which has just been finished is the port one down there, so the separated cycleway. But we've certainly got plans for other parts of Timaru as well. It's coming from the Climate Emergency Release Fund, which is the government fund, because of its contribution to removing gas emissions or carbon.
Thanks, Andrew. Well done on getting the funding. Any update, just while we're on Waka Kotahi, on the main road that you still bounce down? When are they coming to seal that? Now we've got the cycleways sorted out of the Climate Emergency Release Fund.
No, I haven't got any update. I'm sorry. Yeah, we're constantly reminding them of the state of that highway.
They did, though, give us a date, didn't they?
Yes, so the commitment was for the next financial year, and on that I talked with James Cagle from Waka Kotahi this morning, and the reason for the conversation was actually he's due to speak with us in July, so we'll have the opportunity then as a council, but he was highlighting the fact that they're starting to move forward on community consultation around road safety improvements from Timaru through to St Andrews, but was very conscious that he hadn't had the opportunity to get in front of our council first, was just highlighting the fact that it was probably around the wrong way, but we'll have that opportunity in July to speak with James directly.
I'll have one more question, then I'll let someone else have a go. Page 54. Now I've got to get it. It's just around capital delivery. We've got an underspend on $14 million to date. How close are we going to get to 90% of our capital spend in 3 months? That's my concern. We're already $15 million behind in the spend. we've only got 3 months to go. Where are we going to land? And I know that's looking forward from this report, but I'd like to know where we currently sit.
There's a number of projects that have fallen behind. Yeah, our forecast at the moment is 57 million. Where the 90% value is 76 million. So we are going to be short of that 90% value. But yeah, having said that, we've $17 million is tied up in the theatre project, which is being deferred. Yeah, so there's quite a substantial amount there.
Sorry, Andrew, so outside the theatre, what are the other areas of concern where we've fallen behind? Because we had the rigorous debate at the start of the year, set that target, and we're confident we're going to get there. I guess I'm looking, where are we now?
There's a number of areas. If you look on page 55, you'll see the capital expenditure by activities, and the latest forecasts are at the last column there. There are some under expenditures going to be in community support area, and that's around the airport terminal extension. Has not, that's been deferred to next financial year due to we're going to work out through some issues with the tower side of things. In roading and footpaths, there is a little bit of slowdown in that area on a couple of projects. I think it's mainly due to savings rather than actually work not being delivered. In sewer, again, a lot of these are due to savings, and certainly in the waste minimisation area, there's going to be about $1 million saving there. That's due to a tender for a landfill capping, which actually came in $1 million. The tender price was $1 million below budget. So some of these are actually real savings. They're not just deferment of projects.
It would be good to have that noted though somewhere coming forward. Because I'm just looking at the numbers and I'm really concerned. If I had that explanation with it, I might be less concerned. Project finished, saved $1 million. Just a wee bit more fat on the bones.
Yeah, it's an interesting point in how we communicate under budget, because actually we want competitive tendering too, so we don't. It's a balance between sending the message to the market, isn't it? But no, your point's really well made. Thank you, Councillor Piddington. We'll go to someone else now. Who would like to jump in? Councillor Pye, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. My first one is the Audit New Zealand process. Where are we at with that? Acknowledging this is outside of Council's control, but
the latest update on the audit is we're getting close to hopefully the end of it. We have a meeting with the auditors tomorrow to find out the status of where we're at. And we're just closing out a couple of the larger items around Peel Forest, around Sophia Street Car Park, around forestry, carbon credits, things like that. And so they've still got a few things that they need to tick off from their perspective. So tomorrow afternoon we've got, like I say, the meeting, and from that point hopefully we'll be in a position to then work out dates going forward for meetings that we need to hold to be able to get them signed off.
thanks. I've just got another couple, if I may. And just,
Actually, sorry, just
I was just going to
make a comment.
and further to that, Councillor Pye, it's a good question, because the annual report audit does take quite a lot of resource across the organisation, and that does detract when you're trying to do 9-month reports, annual plans, power up a long-term plan along with all of the other work. So it is a significant consumer of a resource. So from the point of view of particularly the finance team, but also others who are getting KPIs and so on and getting the information and various other teams, it does take resource. And as issues arise, the auditors, the longer you go, the more issues, because of the flux of time, they want to unpick them. So it is an exercise that is taking some time and resource. So the sooner we can conclude it, we are very keen to do so.
probably one of my other comments was just reading through that report, the number of times the lack of resources comes up. Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Because I you know, for a number of meetings now, I've got the feeling that our team are all under pressure, which is a concern. And, you know, are we making changes, or is there light at the end of the tunnel, or when are we going to get to a point where we've got the resources we need to deliver?
Well, there's probably, just initially, in part, the annual report does play into that, because actually it's really important that team members go back, and the auditors are fully powered up and they're going to our team and asking. So part of it is this managing the annual report and the demands, but undoubtedly also, and I think Trudy, did you want to make some comments? We run a pretty lean ship, and resourcing is always at a premium, and our priorities have to be made in order to ensure that we try and optimise what resourcing we do have. Is there light at the end of the tunnel? We're constantly seeking to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness with which we do it, so that we can get our information. But the resourcing is, and I'll let Trudy speak a bit more, but it is a challenge, there's no doubt about that. But it has been significantly compounded by us having to manage the annual report at the same time.
Through you, Your Worship, it is a resourcing within many industries are impacted at the moment, and there is a war for talent. So the more talent you can refer to the many roles that we have available at the moment is welcomed. We are seeing an increase in the number of applicants for different roles, but we're always searching for more, and there's great opportunities available for working within council.
Good sales pitch, well done. Councillor Pye. Sorry, we'll finish with Councillor Pye and then go to Councillor Shannon. Thanks. Very polite. Councillor Shannon.
Lovely, thank you. Just a couple of clarification questions, actually. One of them probably for Andrew. For a start, with regards to the waste strategy has been finalised, the government waste strategy. How does that impact on our plans, particularly over the next year?
Not a lot is the short answer, because Timaru has been sort of the leaders in waste, and particularly around waste diversion. There's very little that we actually need to do to comply with this new strategy. The strategy is really a big push on separating out the organics and dealing with those, and Timaru is already doing that. And what's more is we have one of the few few towns in the South Island, in fact, that actually have organic processing facilities. So we are, at the moment, actually getting approached by other councils to deliver their organics to us for processing. So there's opportunities definitely there.
Well, that's good news, isn't it? Probably for Mr. Cooper, actually, under same page 50, district planning. Having the two different district plans to administer, the operative and the proposed, the team are also addressing a range of cutting-edge issues. Sounds impressive, or is it not?
Thank you, Councillor Shannon. It depends where you're sitting. I think it's referencing the MPS for highly productive land and the issues that's presenting for the planning team and for our future growth in terms of locking our urban footprints and not having an escape mechanism. Most rules that are brought in have an appeal mechanism. The only exemption for the MPS, highly productive land, for land that's currently zoned rural that were to be developed, if you like, would be if the developer could show that there was no impact on production. So they would have to take some steps to offset the negative effects in terms of production of their development, which is, as you can imagine, not easy. So that I think that's what that comment's referring to.
Thank you very much. And just one more.
Yeah, of course, thank you.
The use of road reserve by various contractors for private works has also been reviewed. At a number of such sites, contractors, etc., impinging on the road reserve and causing the occasional issue. Same page, next page, sorry, page 51. I would just like to highlight and ask, please, in the reviewing of what's going on there, if officers could be careful, please, not to introduce any more rules, regulation or whatever, adding cost or disabling, in particular, private users.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Shannon. These, yeah, so which question is you looking at as the clarification? Is the road safety or the? Yeah. Road safety or the one below? Road reserve, sorry, yeah. So, yeah, under the Utilities Access Act, we, council are the corridor managers of the road, and therefore we have an obligation to ensure that, safe passage of all road users, which includes walking as well as vehicles and cyclists, so we have to do that. There are a number of activities that happen, particularly around scaffolding, where people are redoing buildings, repainting them, that they just tend to put up that scaffolding across the footpath and don't actually seek consent to do that, and also is predominantly unsafe at times as well. So we're just working with those ones, making them more aware that they do need to apply for a corridor access request and be approved, and they will probably need a traffic management plan associated with that. So it's more education than the big stick.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Shannon. Councillor Pye, go back to you if you like.
Thanks. I just had a question. It's on page 63 as an example, but it's more of a general question. So when we're looking at the operating expenditure, and if we take corporate support, for example, so the year-to-date actual as a percentage of the forecast, I found a little bit deceiving. And if we look at our full-year forecast versus the full-year budget, we'd show that we're at 157% of our budget. And so I guess my wider question is, what are the delegations and what happens? Does the tap turn off, or do we just go, shivers, we're a bit over budget and we'll just carry on? Because there's quite a few of those expenses will end up being well over budget. I think I've worked out roading would be at 123 and overall would be 140% of budget, yet we're only delivering, not specific to roading in general, we're 114% of budget, but we've only delivered 76% of capital work, so that's the forecast.
Yeah, so Councillor Pye, in regard to the roading footpath side of things, the operating, we do slow down as we get into the winter period, so there's usually a big hit on drainage works, road sealing, and also unsealed road maintenance. But yeah, in the winter it tends to drop down. So yes, we're probably going to be reasonably to target.
It was probably more a question for Trudy, but thank you, Mr. Dixon. Around how does the budgeting process work, and when we're over budget, what actually happens?
Through you, Your Worship. So I will defer to my colleague because I haven't been here through a budgeting process. But what usually happens with unfunded or unbudgeted expenditure, depending on the amount, and I look to my Chief Executive, would trigger that anything that was over and above can't be spent until it's endorsed by council or the relevant committee that's allowed the spend. And I will hand over the ball.
Yeah, it's a good question, but so it depends on where it arises, through you, Your Worship. But if you take, in some areas we do get additional funding from central government to go and undertake areas. So if you look at corporate support, I think you'll find we've got considerably more revenue, is that correct, Andrea? And therefore, and it might be tied for us to go and do or undertake a particular activity, such as around Three Waters, where council accepts that there's going to be additional expenditure, but it is tied to additional funding. So that is part of it. But the other part is, what do we do if we're over budget? Then what we tend to do is look at the budget as a whole that has been allocated and operate within an overall fiscal envelope, and we bring it back where we need to in order to get council approval for expenditure.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and probably we can follow up more to the point, and I think your point's around at what point does it come back to council versus internal delegations? so we keep oversight of.
And some of that relates, if I can just add, some of it relates to areas like depreciation, which are effectively an entry to reflect what is happening, and it's a provision, if you like, rather than an actual expenditure item. But it does flow into increasing our overall expenditure. But that's an entry that we put through. So there's a sort of a range of issues, but happy to elaborate, that it drives it.
Yeah, no, that's good. I just really wanted to understand the accountability rather than getting our annual report for last year, which is way too late, and I acknowledge that's not council's fault. And then going, oh, whoops, we blew the budget, and you're nearly a year down the track before we can actually do anything about it.
Yeah, no, it is a really good point. Thank you. Councillor Oliver, we'll finish on this side.
Yeah, so just a quick question, Andrew. What are the triggers that tell us that our Road to Zero plan's actually working? Because clearly it says there that we've had more injuries than the year previous, but we're boxing on with the zero targets, Road to Zero. When do how are we gauging that Road to Zero is actually working?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. We don't have a lot of ways of measuring it. At the end of the day, it's very crude. It is the number of fatalities and serious injuries on our roads is the point. But we do have reasonably few, so you can have quite a high in one year, low in another year. We're constantly doing safety improvements on the roads. We are, in section upgrades, putting in roundabouts. We are doing all that work. And I think if we look at the long-term trend, which is what you got to when it comes to road safety, because it is behaviour change, we are still trending downwards. Even though we've had a bit of a bad year this year, overall trending over the last sort of 5 to 10 years is trending downwards. So I believe that we are making headway in this, but it is very much behaviour, and it does rely on other partners as well, particularly enforcement side of things through the police.
That's good news.
And there'll be a few things we'll be able to pick up when we get James Cagle on around national priorities versus local priorities and the right balance. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? We'll go to the other side. Councillor Booth.
Just a quick question around, like, we rate people, we rate the ratepayers for projects such as the Argentine. We did rate them for earthquake strengthening, etc., and there was money collected to do that. What actually happens to that money that actually hasn't been spent? Is that sitting in a capital account somewhere, or is it spent somewhere else?
So the funding will get put into a reserve and it'll sit there waiting until that project kicks off.
A lot of those projects are funded by loan too, so we just don't draw down the loans until it's needed.
Just obviously looking at some of these numbers, and certainly in your report around about in page 54, about some of these unfavourables, and it's sort of quite confusing. You've got gains on interest swaps, and then you've got deficits because interest is a lot more. It's almost like it should almost just be one sort of interest expense. If I'm right, averaging, we're above our average interest rate we're occurring now is around 4%. So based on 200 million, that 8 million in interest expense is actually being shown in other expenses. Is that it seems to be lost. It's almost, it should be like a separate line item, so because it's actually quite a significant number, and it shouldn't just be sort of buried in other expenses, where I assume it is.
So your interest expense is sitting in your finance costs line. Yeah.
Councillor Booth, what I think you've got is the value of the swab, which is an asset. So that's the movement that gets reflected yeah. And then we have the interest expense and finance expense, but then we look at the spread between the interest received because of what we receive on the swap and the interest we pay. And so what we tend to do is look at the margin between the two as opposed to what was originally budgeted to see, because obviously although our interest costs are going up, we look to offset it with an increased revenue in terms of finance revenue received.
So can anyone tell me how much interest we're actually paying at the moment?
Yeah, the finance costs are on page 58, and for 9 months, we've paid 4.26 million against a budget of 3.3, so we're 955,000 ahead. And then, but if you look up the top, we've received interest of 2.2 against a budgeted amount of 721, so we're 1,560 ahead. So that's what I mean by we tend to look at the two and compare what we receive against what we pay. But the interest costs we've paid to date are 4.2 million for the 9 months.
So we go to say, I'm looking now at page 62, other expenses of 4.8 million unfavourable for the 9 months so far. And there's obviously corporate support. Can someone run through those items for me and tell me why we're so far over on each one?
We would have to do some work on that.
There's a little bit because we've incurred what's allocated to corporate support. Some of those finance costs that we have incurred, that's where they've gone into corporate support. So we're 800,000 over budget. So if you look at most of the finance cost is borne by the corporate support function in council. And so that's where that goes. So that's 800,000. Right. Our professional fees, we're over there in terms of how much we've used against the budget. And our IT services are also over budget because a number of our IT costs, such as licensing for software and so on, also go into the corporate support function. So that's what makes up that number. So we try and break it down at an overall level and then, if you like, at a department or business unit level.
So probably the two big numbers that stick out are roading and footpaths. So is that, have they just cost more to be maintained, or are we hit a schedule? And then there's also water supply at 2.3 million unfavourable. And is that sort of stuff could possibly be capital items?
These are, I like these questions. Because what a lot of that is the depreciation. So again, when you look, what you see on page 58 is, if you like, the whole of council. And when it shows that depreciation, if you like, is running at 5.8 million over the budget. What we then do is go into which activities or departments, if you like, does that depreciation go? And on page 65, you'll see that 2.2 million of that depreciation has gone into, of that overspend, has gone into roading and footpaths. So of that 4.41 million that is unfavourable, 2.2 relates to depreciation. And that reflects the,
The depreciation has a separate note under 5.2. So the other expenses on page 62, the 2 million and the 2.3 million to do with water supply, that's the contracts that are over from an operational perspective. So,
but isn't the depreciation allocated into the business unit?
no, we're talking overall council at this point. So the question was around the other expenses being 4.8 million. Yeah. So that's the roading and the water supply are the same contracts that have been over for the whole year. Is that right?
Yeah, and there would be some additional staffing costs in there, which has been covered. And take water supply, for instance, we had transition funding with the water reform, so yeah, there is additional staff there, but it's matched by the additional revenue. And likewise with roading and footpaths, again, with the transport choices funding, as you've been to fund additional resource to actually deliver those programs.
That's quite right, but I think, Councillor Booth, you're asking why roading and footpaths has got a variance on page 63 of 4.1 million, weren't you? Was one of the questions.
So I put your microphone on.
I assume that 4.8 was part of the summary on page 54, which shows other expenses being 4.8, but then it goes on also over and above to say depreciation is 5.85. So the numbers, that depreciation number is just seems to be out of hand as well. I see we had a capital increase of 350 million, which we're on a spiral to nowhere with that. Every time we revalue, we've got to actually start rating the people more at horrendous numbers. But anyway, so go back at that page, I just wondered why, that there was 4.3 million of that 4.8 was water supply and roading. Yeah, and I would have thought that might have been capital. Yeah, at the end, just concerned that we're so far over.
We are over big time in depreciation because the value of the asset has increased. And the way I liken it is if a building has a life of 10 years and it has a value of 100, every year you have to apportion 10 to depreciation. If the value of the building remains, it goes to 200, but its life remains 10 years, you have to double the depreciation, and that's effectively what's happened here.
Yeah, I think that's a wider conversation for LTP and financial strategy and how we deal with those cost increases sitting in roading, etc. moving forward. But I take your point.
That depreciation is covered on the page prior to that 61, 5.8. So that's separate. They're separate numbers.
Sorry. What we're presenting is the way the information's presented. We're presenting an all of council position on page 58. And so that shows as though you were looking, that's the all of council, and those operating expenditure effectively have 4 categories: personnel, depreciation, finance and other expenses. What we then do is go to page 63 and show them by activity. And then we say what is causing the overruns in each of the activities, which is a breakdown of what's on that page 58.
It seems awfully confusing. How are we all supposed to follow all this stuff? It seems to be probably needs to be in a simpler form, I would have thought. Anyway, there seems to be 3 lots of reports that are saying the same thing, but in different ways.
We can look at simplifying it, Councillor Booth. We want to try and give information that enables people to see what's happening at our organisational level and then what's happening at an activity level. And that's really the intention. So the information, it's the same information but dissected in different ways.
Okay, stepping forward, Councillor Parker, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Burt, Councillor Scott, any questions, comments? Yeah, Councillor Parker.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Yep, you're allowed a comment.
Just really pleased to see the upgrade in the Anzac Square public toilets. So they were pretty undesirable beforehand. Great for the community, great for our truck drivers and delivery drivers that stop along that way, and great for our community that partake in active transport to be able to use some new facilities. So thank you.
The question on that, are the older toilets being discontinued effectively, or are they both remaining? Anyone answer that?
Through your worship, I'll have to come back to you.
Yeah, no,
Don't
that's
know,
all right.
off the top of my head.
Yeah, Councillor Puddington.
Yeah, just a couple of questions no one else touched on just quickly. Page 65, the underspend of 501 on earthquake-prone buildings, is that for the Egantai, or have we got other buildings that we are strengthening?
Through you, your worship, I'll have to come back to you on that question.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's actually possibly with other buildings, but you'll come back, yeah, we'll come back to it.
Yeah, just if I can have some clarity. And just following on the Egantai theme, do we still have the 700k of better off funding for the Egantai? Because I notice on page 87, and I'd like Andrew to give an explanation, because he knows best. We seem to have lost 15 million from the Orangi Stadium project that was coming in a tranche of government funding that we told our community groups we were getting. Looks now in a line that's disappeared.
So what value did you say, Councillor Puddington?
15 million, page 87.
15 million from... the second tranche. Yeah, so was it, that was originally tagged, I didn't, sort of a bit of a pie in the sky, I never had any realistic, No, you
told the community in the second tranche we would be getting 15 million and it had been allocated to a project.
Yeah.
So rather than dismissing it in a line on a report, if we could actually have some meat on the bones, knowing it's not our problem.
Yeah, that's a fair comment, Councillor Puddington. But I can confirm that tranche 1 is still available. Yeah, so the $700,000 allocated Egantai is still going to be there. Yeah, so tranche 1 is $5 million, or just under $5 million. So that is still going to deliver that. The government is, but it's the tranche 2 that has been removed following the reorganisation of the water boundaries.
So they just sent us an email saying it's gone. How did that?
We didn't even get that, to be honest. It was
Okay, we just had to read the paper and realise it had gone.
The only benefit, I think, was that we're realistic, that we weren't getting it, but some other councils were thinking they were going to get it and really hit it in their budget lines and now have big holes moving forward. So, thanks, Councillor Pye. Then we'll look to wrap it up.
I just have one more comment and question, and just for the record, I did write this note before our workshop earlier, but I really like the reports that you've done on the project completion. They were really good, and I think they tell a good story, and so well done on the projects that have been completed and within budget. The one on the Parry pipeline, I think it is, what do we expect the total cost of that project to be? Because it sounded like there was quite a lot of work to go, but we've only got 300,000 left in the budget. That's on page 76.
Unfortunately, I don't have the final cost. That will be where I can work that out based on there. But yeah, there have been some additional costs associated with that project. Yeah, we were going to line the whole thing with a liner, but we've found that that's not practical, and some sections have actually had to be relayed. So there's an additional cost there, but that is matched, of course, by the fact we're not using that lining for that section. So, but I would need to come back to you on the actual final estimated cost.
Yeah, I don't want you to go and do any extra work, because I've been hearing all through this report how under-resourced you are, but I guess that's probably useful to know in these reports if there is an indication of what the final cost will be without too much work. That would be useful. But I thought they were great reports, and it tells a good story. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And you raise a really good point. I love these reports, and it's really easy reading for members of the public too, but I just emphasise that it needs to be really easy for people to find those on the website, because people are interested in this, and it's really easy for them to digest. Councillor Scott.
Just since we're moving on to key projects, I was just two things from me. Page 70 on the Theatre Royal key project update. I just wondered in that timeline whether we needed some stock goes there, because there will be decisions that will need to come back to council on cost, and I feel like that is missing, because it just looks like, oh, we're happy days and off we go. And you know how I feel about that. So I just want to make sure that, you know, so for example, where it goes August, September, it says we're going to start demolition and proof of site. Well, there'll be, at some point, there's going to be some true costs starting to come through that need to be brought back here. So I think the community needs to know there are stock goes still. I would like to see that. And then page 85, just around City Town Program, that section earthquake prone buildings liaison. Is there a report or something on that? I'd be interested in seeing where that is at with our CBD. Because I presume that means a person. Does it? Oh yeah, so yes. Do we have like is there something that, just some background reading that I could...
You're correct, it is a person that is out there doing that and liaising with building owners. They navigate them through the earthquake-prone building process. They're not doing any assessments. Very well received, by the way, by the Chamber of Commerce this morning. Try that, yeah. Yeah, very well received there. So yeah, we will be getting a report, and we're quite happy to present that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's been a pretty good resource and would be good to give an update. Go Councillor Puddington, then Councillor Booth. Then we'll look to wrap up, team.
Just on that report, earthquake prone, now we've got a person in the field, it would be good to actually have a count of the buildings in the CBD, know how many have been strengthened, know how many intend to strengthen, and how many are going to unlikely to strengthen, so we get a feel for the main street, because we've got some pretty big buildings there that are 3-storied that I wonder in the end whether the building owner is getting enough return to actually strengthen. And, you know, as we're building a city town type project, that sort of information would be gold.
And I think the idea was to get a bit of a paint by numbers sort of view of what that looked like, or a heat map or something. So that would be valuable. I'm not sure if we did do any work on that, but Councillor Booth, and then we'll look to put the motion, team.
David Penny, and he's been doing some really good work, and he has been feeding some information back through to the City Hub strategic team. So I know we've had one verbal report, and I assume that he's doing well, and he has definitely had good engagement.
Thank you. Anything further? We'll move now to recommendations on page 40 and 49. Just lost. So just to receive a note, we've got 1, 2 and 3. Happy to move that. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Puddington, thank you. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Brilliant. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll move now to page 88, which is submission to Ministry of Transport, charging our future national EV strategy. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, councillors. We've prepared a submission to go back to the Ministry of Transport due in 2 days' time. The submission speaks to 5 long-term outcomes that are outlined in the discussion document. We are supportive of the initiatives that would lower greenhouse gas emissions and create more sustainable methods of travel. We would support central government's emission reduction plans. However, currently the Timaru district doesn't have the electric infrastructure to be able to support additional EV charging stations. In the submission, we also remind central government that they hold the main policy levers to create the national change. Central government also holds the levers to achieve
the ability for the market to create a sustainable EV charging system. Central government has the financial capacity to ensure the upgrade of the electrical infrastructure. Again, this is touching back on those submissions that we did earlier this year about no unfunded mandates coming down from Central. TDC's role as a council will be to work in partnership on the levers that we have responsibility for, such as any of the bylaw changes that would be necessary to undertake the initiative. I'll take the submission as being read, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Brilliant questions. Councillor Booth, thank you.
Yeah, it was quite good, Andrew. I read what you, in specific, your recommendations around that, the fact that they want us to do a whole lot of stuff, but they don't want to pay us any money, which is fairly normal. So, yeah, until they actually have put some skin in the game and actually offer us funds so we can put infrastructure in and do what we have to do, if that's going to be the case. I think that's pretty much on the mark. So, thank you.
Councillor Pye.
I just have a couple of questions. The first one is, are Alpine Energy putting in a submission, and if so, have you seen it, and are we kind of in alignment with it? Because I would hate for us to both rock up there with submissions and they're totally opposing views. That's my first question.
Unfortunately, I did reach out to Alpine, but I hadn't received anything back about the drafting of this submission.
Do you think there'll be an opportunity to chase that up again before we submit this? Because I just, especially when we're part owners of Alpine Energy, I just think we need to have some alignment there. But appreciate that if you've made efforts and not getting any response.
Happy to do that for you, Councillor.
And then my other question was on the recommendations on page 141. TDC will work with central government, and it talks about making necessary and reasonable changes to policy, bylaws, planning. I just wonder how realistic that is. I mean, we're already in a process on our district plan. Our long-term plan will be next year, and I feel like they'll just come in afterwards, and we've already got our plans set in place, and it won't be that easy to change. So, yeah, I wonder if we can. Yeah, I feel like we're making a promise we can't meet there. That's probably my feedback.
Happy if you wish to make any amendments, just being noting of the time in order to make the submission of council. Obviously, we'll take that into consideration about a final sign-off if I make any changes.
Yeah, I guess I note the word reasonable there, so we probably are covered, but I guess it's it's once again comes back to that, like we're encouraging government not to put stuff in place that we're not funded for, we'd also like to encourage government not to put stuff in place that is out of line with our long-term planning process and district plan. But yeah, I probably am happy as it is, but if you can accommodate something that sends that message a little bit clearer, that would be good, but I'm happy with it how it is.
Yeah, no, it's reasonable to ask for that. I'm not sure what response we'll get, and we live in the world of unfunded mandates, unfortunately. Any further, Evie? Councillor Paddington.
It's kind of like Councillor Pye. I'm concerned we haven't sat down with Alpine Energy, because one of our recommendations on page 140 is Alpine Energy electricity network is currently in high demand at peak periods and could not support additional demand. We're supporting the need for further investigation to the local electricity network by Alpine to minimise the stress or risk of failure of the network. I mean, that's massive if our networks start to fail. So I'm wondering whether, in fact, it should be chief executive to chief executive, because while it's about EVs, I know it's also about infrastructure, so we should be aligning ourselves. And it's not a criticism of the work provided, but more holistically, I guess.
Yeah, that information has come from Alpine themselves. You know, I've had a meeting with my equivalent at Alpine. Yeah, and there are certain areas of the network. It's only part of the network that is under stress at the moment. And yeah, and they are busy negotiating, but of course they have to get their electricity from Transpower, so there's another party that's involved in
understand that, Andrew, but if I read that, I'd be concerned, as I was when I did read it.
You know, and your point is a really good one, because I make assumption that this national EV strategy will feed into the overall energy strategy. It'll just be part of it, which isn't in place when they're already, you know, putting ECA funding out to, you know, make those changes to process heat and those sorts of things. It's a great example of sort of cart before the horse. Ideals ruling before strategy, unfortunately.
You know, certainly happy to run it past Alpine before we submit.
Yeah, I kind of.
No, that's cool. So anyone further? Sorry, apologies. No. So we'll go back to page 88, which is a recommendation. Council endorses the submission to Ministry of Transport, Charging Our Future, and I think the emphasis on just some consultation again back to Alpine would be of benefit. Yes.
Your Worship, delegation to you to sign it off once those, and delegate the Mayor to sign off the final submission. If the council is comfortable with that, and that enables us to close the loop on that discussion with Alpine.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Everyone comfortable with that? We'll just make that point too. Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to move that. Thank you, Councillor Pye. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Move now. Thanks, Bronwyn. Appreciate your work on that. Move now to page 144. And Canterbury Mural Forum update. So this is effectively the Mayor's Mural Forum plan for Canterbury. So I'll just take you through a couple of brief points, and then happy to answer any questions. So I guess key ones, I think you probably have the background, but I will just go through it again. Canterbury Mural Forum is mandated by the triennial agreement between the local authorities. We decided that we'd do a refresh at the end of last year with the change in new Mural Forum coming in. Effectively, the plan is the Mural Forum's strategic plan for the triennium, and I guess the probably key thing is that the decision was made not to totally reinvent the plan, but do effectively a refresh on the whole. It appeared that it was fit for purpose, but I guess the key thing that came out from discussions and workshop was around how we be a little bit more nimble, agile, and focus on some of those key priorities. So 3 immediate priorities currently are advocating with government for permanent and co-investment in flood protection to protect local and national assets and contribute to more sustainable regional economies. I think we'd all endorse that, but happy to have any feedback, but a really big one for certainly the wider South Canterbury and all of Canterbury. Advocating with government for immigration and skills policy that works for Canterbury as a subset as opposed to that New Zealand Inc. approach. And third priority, seeking to collaborate with central government to develop an integrated approach to transport funding and increase the level of funding available for the Canterbury transport network. So there again, another key one, something we've been driving, something that we've focused on with the Benji Patterson report as well. Tomorrow and Thursday, all the mayors are in Wellington presenting to ministers of government, so presenting the plan effectively in the key priority areas. We've got, I believe, 9 ministers that are making their time on Thursday with half-hour slots, and everyone is up. The 10 mayors and Chair Peter Scott, which is a good opportunity, and then later in June, when the Mural Forum meets, we're engaging both in the evening with Christopher Bishop and some other national elected members from Canterbury, and then also later, just sort of leading up with to the election, we are just seeking with the minor parties at the moment, ACT and the Greens, how we engage with them, and there's some changes, obviously challenges because they're smaller parties, it's not perfect. We've got the likes of you, Janie Sage, who sits in Canterbury, who's leaving Parliament, and we're very conscious that we like to engage with sitting MPs, although they sometimes bring candidates along, that we're conscious that we approach it that way. So at the moment, my role as chair of Mayoral Forum is going to present to some of the councils where they've accepted my invitation to go and meet with them. So I'm meeting with Wamedi, Huranui, Selwyn, Ekan, and I think that's it. And then just final to the Mayor's Plan for Canterbury. I think most of you have signed up, but if you haven't, go to canterburymeyors.org.nz and sign up for those updates as well. But happy to take any questions on that one. Yeah, Councillor Pye.
I just wonder how this whole thing aligns with other work streams that councils are involved in, and we don't want to be sending mixed messages. So my example is we are going to advocate for government with investment in flood protection, yet we're talking about potentially, retreat at Rangitata huts rather than protection. And we're advocating for flood protection, yet we've got a report yet to come out to public on a future for the south branch of the Rangitata that councils and that have been involved in. So I feel like there's some mixed messages. I like what you're proposing here.
I like it as well, yeah.
But I feel like there's mixed messages coming out of other work streams that these numerous councils are involved in. And so I guess my question is, how does the hierarchy work, and how do those work streams align with us, or do they just go off and do what they want?
Yeah, look, I think probably the challenge with that one specific in, stop banks and that resiliency of communities, that's where decision making lies, and it is mayors and chairs signing up to this, and effectively councils have endorsed their mayors to do so, and that's probably where the mandate sits. But I'm also conscious within the likes of Ekan, where a lot of this work actually lies, where those priorities sit, and I think it's a key one because we're all competing for that overall funding, so we need to be in don't want to use the expression in the tent, but fighting for our share of the pie when it comes out, and some of those other things still will need to be worked through on a local level. But take your point, because someone let's use Rangitata as an example, might be thinking, well, you're got this approach across Canterbury, and yet at a local level the decision might be differently, be quite different. So it's a challenge as far as comms. I take your point. Any further questions, comments? Otherwise, I'm happy to move that. And I think the key one for this is, and it's interesting from a elected member point of view, mayors, pop off on this one, and we meet quarterly, and just challenge me if you think I'm not communicating appropriately in this one, but pick up from some of those from the website, Canterbury Mayors, as well, if there's anything that you want me to drill into. But I think what I like about the priorities and the opportunity to be nimble is that, hey, if there's different focus after the election on certain things, that we might drop a priority and move on to something else. But a couple of those key ones are going to be there. The likes of skills, that'd be great if that dropped off at some point, and might drop off sooner than the others. But we're going to have a challenge around transport funding and the co-investment probably for some time, especially on the back of Cyclone Gabrielle. So I move that. Councillor Shannon, thank you. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. So next one is a membership of local government, and we've had some good fiery debate on this one before, and unfortunately I was away for the last debate on this, but I remember our commitment was that when the invoice came that we would consider it, membership every annually, and ideally I've asked that we put this in the calendar for maybe a March meeting so we can make that decision earlier. Some of the key things for me, going back to when we left, there was a void of communication and local, we felt like the LGNZ board, and it was probably less than that, council, it was less than that, it was one or two that were effectively signing up to what was that heads of agreement, and we took the position to leave at that time, both based on the fact that we didn't believe they had sort of mandate from the wider membership. At the moment, there's been some significant change. Out of 20 council members, I believe there's only 2 that survived, won the elections and then re-elections or stood down. So it is a new council. The current president, Stuart Crosby, is standing down, and so the decision for the new president is made at the conference in July, and so I think the opportunity to get change in that key leadership position still exists in front of us. And for me personally, I think I know I've shared with you that I know the likes of Mayor Dan at Waimakariri has put his name forward. At the moment, probably won't speak because I don't officially know, but I'm aware of sort of 3 others that may or may not, and so it will be heavily contended, and I guess it's not the be-all and end-all, but at the moment, I would assume that we would support the likes of Mayor Dan, but what I'll do is make sure for those that aren't at conference, we bring that back and have that full discussion on the pros and cons of that leadership position, because it is pretty key. But there again, stepping back for me, LGNZ very much is around the benefits that we receive. We're paying roughly 50k. There's also costs over and above that if we're going to zone meetings, which are in the South Island, so we normally drive to, but there's regional sector meetings in Wellington. There's cost of transport and accommodation in that regard. So it's a membership that you really need to use, and the benefit sits for me largely with that ability to interact and with other councils and other councillors and build those networks and what have you. So I mean the key challenge for me is we've tried to communicate out the calendar in advance. I think we had a couple of hiccups because we weren't fully back in the tent because we weren't on all the email lists. But when and I recognise that people have busy lives, but it's something that we sign up to. So I would like you all to take the opportunity at some point to come to those meetings, because that's there's real benefit, and I know the ones that have been can probably speak to that point. So I guess that's probably it from me, but I think it's something we need to do. We need to review and say, are we getting $50,000 worth of benefit? And I would say if we're not actively going to these events, then that would be a concern for me, because I don't think we would be getting full benefit. But happy to take who's Councillor Parker, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. That's my question. Has the membership been well used over the past 12 months? Has this council been attending, using the website, reading the emails? I haven't, because I was unsubscribed, so that's only just been fixed up today. So is there added value? What is the added value? Is it 50 grand, or is that 50 grand better off to go into more education and training for councillors to make better decisions on governance? Are we getting our bang for our buck? That's my question. I personally have not attended anything in the last 12 months, so I open it up to see.
Yeah, so we've only been back in since October. So I think, basically you've had a 6 month window. I've pretty much attended everything. I think Councillor Jackson, who else have we had with Councillor Shannon, who else has been away? And I know some people are on the list to go to things moving forward. But as an example, in Zone 5 and 6, I know it was a bit of a haul to Queenstown. It takes a couple of days out, and I recognise that, there were school holidays and things like that. But, because the costs were less because it's in the South Island, that one is an example. Some councils, had 5 councillors attend. And it was, really really good content. You normally have ministers, coming. And probably the key one that I would encourage you all to get to is come up to rural and provincial. There's real benefit in that one, and I think Councillor Shannon and Councillor Booth are coming to the all of sector meeting in a week or so. Yeah, but are you happy to take any further questions, comments, Councillor Booth?
I guess while the membership number's 51,000, you can probably safely assume there's another $50,000 in expenses for staff and flights and accommodation. I guess my major beef last time was that the same people were involved, that had basically sold us down the down the path with Three Waters, and that was just. And unfortunately, the chief executive is still there, which she was one of the key people, and the chairman, by the sound of it, is stepping down. I guess I've got mixed feelings about it, but I guess if you were to compare elected members versus staff, is it really for the 80% elected members is the benefit? Would that be right?
Well, I'd have to ask staff in that regard, but I'd say at least 80% sits with elected members versus staff. It's more Tautura, isn't it?
Through you, Your Worship. So LGNZ's for the political arm, although undoubtedly we as officers benefit from the research and policy that they produce. But the SOLGAM, or it's now called Taituara, is, if you like, the parallel body for officers who give us support and advice in terms of where we go, or another source of where we go for local government intel and collateral. But officers do use LGNZ as well in terms of the material and policy advice they create and use.
So in the past, when we were within the group, did we use their services, such as they do provide services to councils, their specific parts?
Yeah, I mean, as an example, you were at the inaugural workshops and stuff. We used LGNZ quite heavily through that period. For new elected members 3 years ago, but obviously at the time when we were planning the last one, we weren't a member, so we looked outside of that. And saying that, I'd say we probably had a better, quality presentation from the people that we used. And look, they do have some other training services and that they've put forward, but there's an extra cost. It's like the add-on. So there again, for us, I think the key things are, are we happy with the direction and the change around that governance table? And we won't know that probably until the conference, and then we probably won't see that for another 6 months out, which I think probably times well with another review in March next year. And then, it's as much as you want to put into it, and that's the key thing. If you're not looking on, their website, if you're not attending functions, then,
through you, Your Worship, if I give an example of where staff do have some involvement, LGNZ really put together what was known as the Road Efficiency Group, and one of our officers was extensively involved in that, and that was a partnership between local government, LGNZ, officers of territorial authorities, and Waka Kotahi, in terms of advocating for models that were beneficial. So that was a way that we had some significant benefit through LGNZ, and that was one of our officers being involved with that, and that did produce significant benefits for the sector, as well as helping us as a council. So it's through those sorts of alliances and arrangements that we can get some benefit through, other than just elected members, but it is primarily the elected members' political advocacy body.
Councillor Shannon.
Yeah, it's possibly the timing of things that makes this a more difficult decision, I think, that when we signed back up in October, didn't we? And when does that year end? The end of March. Yeah, and there's yet quite a bit of, as you alluded to, quite a bit of stuff to go through in terms of re-elections of president and what have you, and because these advocacy groups, as far as what we do here, it could be and it should be a powerful thing, just like Canterbury Mayoral Forum. It's a powerful thing, and if this was working effectively for us, there is great value in that, and LGNZ speaking on our behalf and using them to lobby for things that need to happen. And it's possibly been the flavour of the last while that's been compromised somewhat, and we don't really know what's going to happen come October, and again with the potential changes internally. And from the meeting I went to in Wellington to have the first look at that future for local government presentation, to see that early on what that could potentially look like, and then if LGNZ was functioning well as an advocacy group, what it could do to affect positive change within that space. I see what it could do, and I'd like to stick around to see what that does look like. It was tremendously valuable for me personally very early on in, this training to go to Wellington it was rural and provincial, wasn't it? And meet the other councillors and mayors and chief executives as well. There were some of those there, and to see firsthand, right, I could see what we could do if it was working well, and I think there is a chance that it could still if we stuck around.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, look, and we'll need, it is timing to your point, Councillor Shannon, and we'll know, by the end of the year whether there's, significant change. And I think where they went wrong is they got too close to, central government and need to stay at arm's length and are a lobby group, for the needs of communities across the country effectively. So as long as they stay in their lane. Look, and there's been some really good changes, and I know the ones that are from Canterbury that are around that table. You do have Mayor Sam from Selwyn, who is there from one of the two that was there from last time, but you've got Mayor Phil Major in Canterbury as well, and I think that's it. But you've got some strong voices around that table, and so there is some significant change. So look, I'd be happy to endorse it this time, and then we can probably really dial down into what the value is in March next year effectively. So if there's no further discussion, I'm happy to move that we do, which is recommendation A, that we stay in for a further year and review again in March next year. So agrees to continue its membership of Local Government New Zealand. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Shannon. Any further discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, brilliant. Good discussion. Thank you, because that is of interest to a lot of people out there.